Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Michael Fisk with Tri-States Roadmaster Group, and just trying to get everything situated here. I cannot see comments, so I did something wrong here. Hold on a second. Hmm. Maybe I did it right, and it's just different again. Anyway, today is February 18th, Friday. We'll take a couple seconds while people get on. I'm going to try not to mess around with my hair today. The safety message, of course, if you're driving, don't watch this message. Don't watch this. We rely on you guys to be professional. I had an issue, this week with the driver that was on his tablet while he's when he shouldn't have been, and so guys, we just rely on you to and gals to be professional and do the right things out there. But this will be recorded, of course, and kept here on Facebook for a few days and then posted on YouTube. Speaking of YouTube, we've got a bunch of our commercials and that kind of stuff on there. So if you get a minute, jump on our YouTube channel and cruise around. I mean, we've got all these Facebook lives that we do on there, as well as some other content that's kind of interesting. Martha, hi. Michael Harrison, hi. And I think Riley's on here. Riley, if you don't mind, maybe just posting a link to our YouTube channel. Maybe it'd be helpful. So. Joseph Lapuma, Highwind, yeah, be careful. There's a lot of weather this time of the year for sure. While people are getting logged on, Joseph, I'll share with you. As some of you guys know, I drove for a couple of years, and the very first company that I drove for was a reefer company, JBS Carriers, actually out of Greeley, Colorado. And so after my training and everything, the first load I did by myself, I picked up a load of hanging beef from Hiram, Utah, that's going to Indiana and going up there on 80. Well, this is my first solo load that I did. I get through Wyoming, or I get to Wyoming right around Evanston there, and eastbound, and I see a bunch of trucks pulled over, and I don't really know what's going on. So I pull into a truck stop and say, hey, trying to figure out what's happening. They say, oh yeah, don't go much further. There's a pass. I don't remember what it's called anymore. Was shut down, or it's going to be shut down. Due to high winds. So my very first solo trip as a driver, I was stuck in Wyoming because of high winds for about 4 days, and that's when you realize, hey man, better carry some food and better carry some other other provisions when you're in the truck, because you just never know when things will happen. So be safe, Joseph, and everybody else that's stuck in weather. We appreciate you guys for the work that you do out there. So um, Elizabeth Hanson, hi. Riley just posted the our YouTube channel. Joe, yeah, are you in Wyoming as well, Joe? For the last couple of days, you said that you're stuck. 50 mile per hour gusts with yeah, with the light trailer. That's not a great environment to be in, Joseph. But this is where our guaranteed day pay helps. Hopefully, I mean it's at least you're not sitting there for for nothing. Melissa, hi. Joe. Hi. Okay, we'll go and get started here. Appreciate everybody, that's logged on. The first thing I want to share. I don't have a lot of specific things that's maybe super important. So if you've got questions or comments, send them in. But the first thing is last Friday, I got a voicemail from a driver, not one of our drivers. He mentioned that he was in the Love's truck stop in Joplin and saw a couple of our trucks, and he said he's always been super impressed, by us, and he's met a few of our drivers, and he said, he's kind of interested in seeing what he can do, to drive with us, but he said he was helping one of our drivers, back into a slot, the Loves and Joplin, and went to talk to one of our drivers and said that our driver is really rude to him. Um, hey, listen. I mean, it's we have bad days. You guys have bad days. I mean, you guys have a lot of stress, out there, and and you get a random stranger coming up to you and maybe not feeling social and everything. I get it. I share that with you just to let you know that it's for better and for worse. We're respected. We're seen. There's other drivers that understand what we do, and we're just visible. And so I just kind of encourage you guys to just be aware of that. I mean, as tri-state drivers, I mean, it's we are probably more visible than others. That includes ATCO drivers being equally visible. But the other part of the message, I think, just take care of each other. I mean, we're talking about the weather issues, and that kind of stuff. I was on my way to Richmond a couple of weeks ago when they had a massive snowstorm, there that shut down, what was it, 85 right on the Tennessee border. And it was kind of cool because I knew that if things got into real jam, I can go and, knock, bang on a door, of a truck driver, and they could probably help me out if I needed to get, there so long where I ran out of gas or need to get warm or, something like that, And so, there is a community, within the industry, and just take care of each other, like we do. Earlier today, we had one of our drivers, have a medical issue, and I got an email from one of our drivers that left us a couple of years ago, and he'll email me once in a while just to kind of check in. But he said, "Hey, I saw a tri-state driver, have this medical issue. Hope everything is okay, and wanted you to know about it." And that's a very cool thing. I mean, it's because we didn't actually know about it. At the moment, I think Larry sent us the message within minutes of him seeing it, and it's very cool. That he's still thinking of us and thinking of our drivers and thinking of you guys, and it is a community, and we just take care of each other. There. So anyway, I just kind of wanted to share that thought. There. As Kirk recommends, stay on the high side of fuel. That's a great recommendation. I mean, don't let your fuel, go down too low. That's one of the conversations we have whenever we look at fuel optimizers, and stuff is, we got to be able to let the drivers, assess, what their needs are, based on, especially the time of the year and everything. So you never know when you're going to be, sitting for 2 or 3 days, because of weather or whatever. So that's a great suggestion, Kirk. Joe supports that. Jack, hey, from Speedco. Michaeline, hi from Iowa. The other thing I kind of wanted to share is a little personal, but some of you guys may be interested, in this. Google Gail Halverson, and he was known as the Candy Bomber in World War II. He just passed away this week. He's a fairly well-known figure, but he was a friend of mine that I knew back in the days when I lived in Utah. But he is pretty famous. There's been movies about him, and again, if you Google Candy Bomber, it'll be my friend Gail. And at 101 years old, he passed away. He was involved in the food lifts in West Berlin, Germany. After the Soviet occupation of East Germany, and he was involved, with the U.S. missions of dropping food and coal, behind the Berlin Wall. But he specifically, talks about, after one of his runs, he saw a bunch of children on the wrong side of the fence, and he went up to them and he shared, some gum that he had with about 30 kids, and he only had a couple of sticks of gum, and he just commented how, all these kids, they split it up and they shared, what little that he gave with them. And then he, commented how, the other kids, would smell the wrappers, and they're just so, grateful for what they had. And then he and you know, that first night after that, he got with his navigator and co-pilots and other pilots, and they gathered all of their kind of rations, you know, that the military gave them at the time, tied little parachutes to them, and then they would drop them to kids, you know, on the other side of the Berlin Wall, and that be turned into a phenomenon where I don't remember, something like 30 tons of candy was distributed by him and other you know, bomber pilots, you know, post World War II, you know, all for kids. And again, I mean, there's just a lot going on in the world, and I've just always thought that that's a really cool thing where you know, he was already doing humanitarian work, you know, dropping you know, food, but kids, I mean, you know, often forgotten, and you know, he let them know that they're important. And there are stories, you know, decades later of you know, ambassadors, and some of these kids, they grow up, and some of them have very, you know, prominent and influential you know, jobs later in life. And you know, and they remember this, you know, act of kindness from an American, you know, bomber pilot, and it affected them. You know, truck drivers, we talk about how truck driving is not the prestigious industry that it used to be. I mean, when I was a kid, you know, in the growing up in '70s and '80s, you know, I mean, when you talk to a little boy in particular, hey, what do you want to be when you grow up? You know, it was, you know, policeman, fireman, truck driver, right? And it's and that's not the case these days. I mean, it's and again, you know, we don't get into the politics of things, but the whole, you know, defunding the police, and you know, first responders, and you know, all those things. I think truck drivers to many kids are still glamorous. You know, I mean, you know, we drive these big, impressive vehicles, you know, that they see going down the road, and so, you know, if you get a moment and you see some kids at a truck stop or something, you know, I mean, it's you know, I think it'd be useful to remember that they're probably pretty impressed by you, you know, and you can probably have an impact on them that you may not be aware of, the same as my friend Colonel Halverson had, you know, with kids that he's just distributed candy to. So anyway, just kind of wanted to share those thoughts, you know, there. Riley shared a link, you know, for that, so, you know, I appreciate that. Yeah, Jack McFadden, exactly. Uncle Wiggly Wings. That's exactly right. You know, Jake Moffitt, hi. You know, he and I were sharing some emails about, you know, the impact. You know, Jake works with kids in the scouting program. You know, and it's kids need to know that they matter. You know, there, and like I said, as truck drivers, I mean, you guys are matter to kids. I mean, you know, you're big and impressive. So. Hi, Daniel, Ginger, No Red. You don't want to grow up. It is hard adulting, but I think it's harder being a kid, you know, these days. Anyway, a couple of other things you want to cover. We do have some openings in our drum fleet. And then we have two more flatbed teams, you know, that we're looking for, FYI. You know, let me know if you're interested. Listen, there's pros and cons to, you know, all these different departments and divisions, you know, that we're in. Drum, you know, you don't do as much has waste. You know, for the most part, you're going from, you know, military base to military base. It tends to be a bit more social, you know, as well, because they, you know, we gather, the drum fleet will gather, and there's a lot of socialization, you know, on a lot of weekends, you know, type of thing, you know. But the attendance requirements can be onerous, you know, and so, you know, so there's a flip side to that. Flatbed, you know, it pays really well, but it's physical, and if you want the physical work, you know, then that can be a cool thing. I did flatbed for a little bit, and I enjoyed, you know, just being able to have that physicality, you know, that you don't get, you know, just standard driving. It does pay, you know, quite a bit better, but the tarping, you know, and you know, the scraping the snow off your deck, you know, especially this time of the year, is not fun, you know. So it's, you know, there are trade-offs to that. But we do have a couple of openings again in our drum fleet and flatbed. You know, if you're interested, let me or Jeanette Denton know in particular, and we can guide you, you know, through that process, you know, there. Jeremy Luther, hi to you. Joyce, having trouble hearing the video. Okay, sorry about that. I'll try to speak louder. If anyone else is having problems, let me know. And then Jeremy, I'll stay young as long as you can. Yeah, I mean, young is good for sure, but wisdom is great as well. A couple of rumors out there that I want to address. There's a company, a flatbed company, and they're part of the Dasky family called Smoky Point that some of you guys are familiar with. We are doing some work with Smoky Point. Smoky Point is an open deck flatbed carrier. They don't do, hazmat, DoD work or anything like that. But you'll see us that Roadmaster Group is involved, with them. We may have the ability, to share yards and terminals and facilities, type of thing. They're based out of Seattle, North Arlington, north of Seattle. We're up there, Port Hadlock and that kind of stuff. So it's there may be those kind of opportunities. It's we don't do the same work, so we're not going to be swapping trucks and that kind of stuff. I know I got a couple of messages because we have a few Smoky Point trucks running under the tri-state umbrella, just simply because we're short on trucks on the tri-state side, and Smoky Point had some extra trucks, and so we're pulling them over to the tri-state side. But they're two separate entities, two separate companies. Again, there may be opportunities that they're evaluating, for maintenance and that kind of stuff. Sharing driver lodges and facilities, and so forth. But just kind of wanted to address what's going on with that out there. There's another company in the northeast that we're potentially going to get involved with as well, and we'll share that information, as it becomes more, relevant. As you guys know, what we do is very specialized. The DoD and the AA&E, world that we're in. But and it's because of our drivers, because of the training that you guys have and the professionalism that you have. We are the gold standard in haz waste and AA&E, and so and we have many examples of that. And I'm well aware that not only customers watch this, but some of our customers, some of our competitors watch this as well, and. We've gotten in trouble in years past for talking about, how great, we are and how we want to, take over the world that we work in, and hopefully, this won't be used against me. But listen, we've earned the right to be proud of the work that we're involved in our reputation, and no, we don't do everything perfectly, but we do things pretty darn well, and that's been confirmed by states, DOT, police officers, Northern California in particular. I mean, we've been asked to come in and train, DOT compliance and company compliance and customers, compliance, and so, so it gives us other opportunities to expand, within our world, within our niche. To other places, and we're always looking at that. I mean, it's dangerous and very difficult, to stay stagnant. If you stay healthy, we want to grow, methodically, with a plan, and in a way that enhances everything for our drivers, to us, and so forth. I received a message, and Joy, I apologize, I haven't had a chance to respond to it yet, but received a message from Joy, talking about how things have just been, really, really good for her, and we're grateful for her. I mean, she does tremendous work, and we're grateful for all of our drivers. You guys deserve the money that you guys make, and again, my goal is to get you more money. The other big challenge that we're trying to conquer is more home time. I mean, it's this isn't something you guys can do forever, and families and couples, and so we still need to be able to grow. And we've talked about this in years past, but maybe not recently. we're never going to grow too big. I mean, we just can't. I mean, we're just too specialized, of what we do. However, getting bigger will help us, create routes and dedicated lanes and regionalization, that gives, drivers opportunity to get by the house more often or, on a more weekly basis. And those are all things that we continue to work on, because as you make the income, necessary to have a good standard of living, the next step for you and for all of us is getting that work-life balance. And so we'll continue to be aware of that. So just know that, our growth plans are really based on, things that are healthy for us and productive for us and allows particularly our single biggest, asset and workforce class, our drivers, to have more flexibility and more opportunities, as well. So, okay, yeah, Martha, you want a manual transmission? We're working on that. I can't promise that. There's manual transmission, automatic transmission. We have some opportunities to get some manual transmission. We're going to try to, but I can't promise that. But we're working on a few of those opportunities. Jeremy, it's good to be proud of what we do. I agree. And be proud without arrogance, right? And I echo Riley. We are lucky to have the drivers, that we have for sure. So. Anyway, I just kind of wanted to address, the rumors out there and what is going on. I mean, it's, Tri-State truly is the leader, in our industry, and we're led by our drivers. I mean, it's, and that is the case. And so we appreciate all of you. Any questions or comments or anything like that, that's not addressed here, email me, michael.fisk@roadmastergroup.com. And again, I hope you see and realize, even if it's awkward, we'll address it. We'll talk about it. I mean, this is not the proper forum, to discuss everything for sure. But we'll discuss anything, that you want to talk about for sure. So, thank you so much to everybody. Be safe, be warm, have a great weekend, and really do appreciate, each of you. Thanks so much.